All right. Hey, Collegiate. Happy New Year. We got our first video of the year talking with Jeff Eads from down in Muncie, Indiana. Jeff works as I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit, but he works in the Career Center at Ball State University, and he's also a pastor at the Revolution. And Jeff has a book that he's written that I'm excited about for Collegiate, how it will bless students transitioning out of college life into the career world. But Jeff, why don't you just take a second, introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get into the book.
Sure. I'm Jeff Eads. Like you said, I've been working at the Career Center for a number of years, and primary responsibilities are coaching students for professional development, so career coaching, helping them explore what's next and or prepare for their opportunities and internships, career paths, those kind of things. And then that's been the bulk of my time here. Over the last couple of years, I've been more employer facing, right? So sitting down with recruiters, with executives, and really kind of helping them think through. So in some ways, I see my position as a translator between the two worlds, helping the employers see on their side what students are looking for, and helping the students see, hey, this is what employers are looking for. This is what they're talking about, and how do you prepare for those spaces. So I do that with all students, but one of my jobs on campus too is liaisoning specifically with campus ministries. So not just those within Collegiate, obviously, but on campus, all the different ministry organizations, which puts me in a space to have lots of conversations about campus ministry and those skill sets and the things that people are doing there. And so my relationship with Collegiate goes back to when I was in college. In the mid-90s, I came to know Jesus through campus ministry here on campus. And then my path took me a couple different places in higher education and in campus ministry. So I have some of my own experience within that campus ministry path too. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. And yeah, thanks again for your time today. So your book Qualified, How to Think About Your Ministry Experience in Relation to Your Job Search. This is what that looks like for those who are watching. Could you share just a little bit? It might be obvious to intuit where this came from, given your career, but could you share a little bit the idea behind the book, how this came to you to actually put something physical out there for people to read?
Yeah, it's really kind of born out of a lot of conversations, individual conversations with people where we're asking. Here's the big part of it. I think this is the kind of the unfortunate part of it, of kind of our headspace sometimes is like we think in buckets, right? Like, oh, I'm doing this ministry thing over here, and then I'm also in college pursuing an education for a career path, right? And that somehow those are categorically different. And I think the big church kind of picture, we talk about those things, we struggle with it, doing that. Like, so it's not just a campus ministry thing, it's not just individuals. So I think my conversations in that space is, I think often having done some campus ministry stuff, my first career path out of college was campus ministry, right? And raising support and doing that path, right? And then went into higher education, went into some other opportunities. And so I've had to translate that, right? But then in doing that, to hear just the self-speak that other people have as they're trying to wrestle through, like, how does this experience that I have show up, or how do I talk about it? Or even just, I'm reviewing resumes. I'm doing practice interviews with students. I'm doing this stuff all the time. And I'm hearing the way they struggle to kind of make sense of how campus ministry fits in this whole thing, if it does at all, right? If any of that even fits into the career conversation at all. So I'm doing that on a regular basis. And then there's those folks who have been in campus ministry. So I'm working with, since I'm liaisoning out with campus ministries, right? I'm working with the staff members too. And with the nature of campus ministry, a lot of folks aren't staying there forever, right? So at some point, these folks are transitioning and saying, hey, I think I'm going to go do something else, but I've been in campus ministry 5 years or whatever. Can I do anything else? And it's like, well, of course you can do something else. Man, you have all these skills. Like you have so many skills that really put you at an advantage out there. But it's that idea that the unfortunate part that I'm talking about is the idea that they're coming to me with that question, like, can I do anything else? It's like, well, yeah, you haven't crippled your career path because you've been in ministry. You've actually grown it. And it's because I'm sitting with employers all the time having these conversations. I know what they're asking for. And I know what they're saying. And they're telling me, gosh, we need people with leadership skills, communication skills, organization skills. They're not saying you need to know how to do this specific job as if you've been in it for 10 years. That's not what they're looking for. They're like, do you have these skill sets? Because we're going to shape you into this opportunity if you're the right person, the right fit, right? So anyway, there's so many conversations being had about that, that it was kind of a natural thing for me to say, gosh, I want to kind of write down some of these things as it relates to some of the work I'm doing in the normal conversations. Because if I'm having this many conversations in my seat, I can imagine that collegiate pastors and staff members and other campus ministry folks are doing that too. And that has been proven true with some of the campus ministries here beyond collegiate who've used kind of the material of this book with their own students and staff and so forth. And so it was kind of a test case with them. And they're like, yeah, this is helpful. And so we thought we'd get it out there for others to use too.
Great. Yeah, I haven't read the whole thing yet. I've looked through it, and it's a very short, digestible book, though, 30 pages, and you go through sort of 7 different competencies of here's something you may have done in ministry, here's how that translates to the career space. What's the best way to use this material for someone who just might pick this up? Like, well, how would you advise maybe just initially going through it?
Yeah, that's you're right. It's really small. I did that on purpose because I don't think most people, if you're going to hand them something like, hey, here's a good book to think about career stuff, and it's like, oh, it's several hundred pages. They're like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm kind of busy writing my own resume right now. So yeah. And one quick thing, the competencies that are in there, there's a national organization called NACE. So the competencies themselves aren't something that I just kind of drummed up. It was really looking at this national association that I'm engaged with that works with employers and career service people. And they're asking the question, like, what makes someone career ready? What makes them ready to go in the workforce out of college and into it? And so really it's a broader scale recognition of these competencies. And so all I'm doing is taking those competencies and saying, here's how your ministry experience fits into that. And here's how you talk about it, right? So I would say, if you're a student picking it up, I'd say, gosh, it's a quick read. There's some discussion questions at the end of each chapter just to really kind of get your head around, like, man, do I have these skills? And you do, by the way. But do I have these skills? Where have I gained these skills? Like, so, did I lead a small group? Have I done some marketing stuff for it? Whatever it is, there's, communication skills, so forth. So I think for them, it'd be a quick read, even before applying for internships, or if you've already done your internships, applying for your jobs, to say, how would I say these things? Because some of it's also talking about how do you get past insider language, like, oh, I disciple people. It's like, okay, well, if I'm an employer looking at your resume, that may mean nothing to me. It might mean actually something negative to me. And so, or I went on a mission trip, or I did evangelism, those kinds of things. It's like some of it's also thinking about your experiences and like, how might I say those differently to get at what they're really asking, which is, do you have communication skills? Yes, I happen to gain them in this way, but that's no different than if I would have gained them as a resident assistant in my residence hall or whatever, right? So anyway, for them, I'd say, gosh, a quick read through that stuff before even entering those processes or doing an interview or something like that would be helpful. If I'm a collegiate staff member, I think I'd be looking at that as like, gosh, my job, 100% of the students I'm working with are going into the workforce. These are good skills for me to be able to talk about these things with them. And perhaps if I'm on staff with a ministry, maybe I haven't actually walked that path myself. So maybe I haven't thought about these things because I went into ministry, right? And so I think it's a resource there to kind of help kind of think that through. And we've found helpful in our space and some other campus ministries too, is just using it with their seniors, right? Like taking their juniors or seniors and say, hey, let's use this book as a resource and let's talk about it. And they've given it out to their students and said, let's have some discussions around these things. So I think that would be a way to do that. If I'm on the staff or pastor side, I think one way that I didn't think about this being a resource, but now I've learned that other people have used it this way, is ministries who are recruiting people. So if you're recruiting students to come into your ministry, some of the questions that are being asked by those students are, is this going to set me back on my career path? Or my parents are saying, this is crazy, you shouldn't go do this. You're going to cripple your chances to go do something else, right? And I think for that reason, I think it's really helpful to be able to, for the the staff member who's doing the recruiting to have confidence and language around that, to have some language like, hey, actually, no, we've done some thinking on this, and here's a resource to help you navigate that. Maybe to communicate that to the parent, like, hey, maybe check this out if you're struggling with what your kid's about to do. But I've seen some camp, like some camp, like Christian camps that have used it as a recruiting kind of tool as well. And then the other part of that, I think, is, and this is real practical, but if you really want to take it that next step, which I think would be really important, would be if you're in campus ministry and you're working with students and they're doing these things that are creating skills, maybe have an extra step in there with your students, because you know you're preparing them for whatever's next. And that might be recruiting them onto being on staff with you, but whether they come on staff in the transition one day down the road, or whether they're going out in the workforce and they're going to be an accountant or a teacher or whatever, I think it'd be really helpful to equip them with saying, hey, we're doing this small group thing, but here's some skills you're learning that are really critical, that are going to show up in anything you do out there, right? Like employers are asking you to have critical thinking skills. See the way we just problem solve this issue with our small group and how we're going to get people there, whatever, this really practical thing. That's just critical thinking. And that's a skill that every employer is going to want to see from you. And so you're learning it here, right? So in that sense, I think that'd be a really practical way to put it to use as well. So again, I think what's fun is seeing other people pick it up, which I didn't know. I just kind of put it out there in case it's helpful to somebody, right? But now to have some people coming back saying, man, this is helpful. We shared this with these people in this way and used it in this way. So that's fun to kind of see how people are utilizing it.
Yeah, it's just reading through it, the little bit I have, and even thinking to some of the students that I work with, and even those who have sent off, I know that there is that question of, okay, what do I even have? Even if they haven't necessarily had those ministry experiences, I think helping them have these categories of competencies to think through, it is a gift as someone who's I've been in ministry since college, to see, oh no, these, you do know how to do these. And like you said, bridging that gap is really,
well, Yeah. So one of the things that, just to also is like, we're having this conversation, like in career centers across the country, like not just us at Ball State, but like my profession, we're working this language of these 8 competencies into all the program we're doing. And so if you're in a business fraternity, if you're in a classroom, like this professional development piece is happening all over the place. What I think is unique is it seems like folks who are trying to figure that out with their ministry experience, it feels like a bigger leap for them kind of mentally or and sometimes emotionally to bridge that gap of like, oh, this is the same thing, right? So just as a way of kind of normalizing that, like we're doing this with everybody, like resident assistants, we're hey, when you're resolving conflict in your residence hall, that's conflict resolution skills. Those are important. The employers are asking for those. So when you're in a job interview and they say, tell me about a time when you've been in conflict and how you resolved it, they're asking that because they want to know you have that skill set. And if you can tell them a story about being an RA and resolving that conflict, great. So we're trying to help every student understand that. So so technically this book, I could have written, and we still could write a version of this to student athletes, and write a version of this to residents, or write a version of this, because it's really just kind of putting it specifically for them. It's contextualizing the language for a specific people group, which happens to be students who are involved in student ministry in some form, right? Or people who've been on staff with student ministries or whatever. So that's really what's going on there.
Yeah, I love it. And it's clear that your heart is there to just find whatever student, and the roadblocks are often there, right? You mentioned earlier the self-speak of, well, this is my context, and everyone sort of sees themselves as this sort of unicorn that I don't fit in the world. And you're trying to help, like, no, there's a space for you here. And I love that we have this resource for us. So if people wanted to get copies of this or any other resources to help their local churches contexts, what's the best way to go about getting this book?
Sure. Yeah, the quickest, easiest way is jumping on Amazon and just grabbing them off Amazon. If someone was wanting to give like a bigger bulk of them for some reason, we can get those for them, and I can get those out to them. It just takes longer because the process just takes longer. So I just need to know that well in advance, but they could email me and just reach out to me over my Reliant email, jeff.eads@reliant.org, and they could say, hey, we're want to get some bulk versions of these things out. If I knew in advance, I could get that kind of out to them in that way. But if you're just getting a handful of them, they're relatively cheap. It's on Amazon, and they'll get there way quicker by doing that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share just about this, maybe encouragement for our people going into this semester, or if there's anything else you had that we haven't covered in the questions I shared, but that's kind of all I have, but I'll open it up if you have any other thoughts before we sign off here.
Yeah, I think one thing, I mean, just kind of my heart, having been in spaces of ministry and spaces of, kind of working with this employer world and so forth, I think when I was a student in ministry, doing campus ministry stuff, the only time we talked about vocation or work was really if we were recruiting students into ministry, but there's a point somewhere in my journey here where it kind of occurred to me like, oh, all of these students are going to do something, and either the Lord is the Lord of all things or he's not. And if he is the Lord of all things, it actually is pretty exciting to think about, like, and I think we say that, right? Like, we're preparing the next generation, but sometimes when we drill down into the conversation about vocation, it's really like, come on staff with us so that we can, lead people to the Lord and change their lives spiritually forever, right? And that's significant. But there's this other part of like, and yet you might have another 80 years on this earth doing whatever it is that you're doing, and it could be an accountant. And do we address that in a way that doesn't continue to reiterate that idea that we live our lives in buckets, right? Like I have my spiritual life and I go to church, and then I have this whole world of work that I kind of do and then check out of and then go back to church or whatever. And so I think even this conversation around this, my hope would be that it broadens that idea that it's actually pretty exciting if you're in campus ministry, that you have the possibility to influence people in every single field and vocation out there in the world as they're entering into it. And that's pretty incredible. And I know that we know that in one sense, but I'm not sure how often we practically get into that actual conversation with people as they're going. Because I may never sit in a room with a room full of, school teachers or accountants or actuaries or whatever in my professional life in ministry, but I'm actually walking through life with those students before they launch out into those fields, and they're going to have that opportunity to be in those spaces. And so again, it's either all work matters or no work matters. In one sense, another book for just a real quick resource is Dorothy Sayers has a really short essay. Sayers has a really short, she's a contemporary C.S. Lewis, they were friends, called Why Work? And it's a fantastic little essay. And one thing that, she just brings out in that is this idea of like, when we're working with a carpenter, often the best the church offers them is like, hey, don't live a wild life and don't get drunk and don't, it's kind of behavior management. And it's like the one thing the church should be saying is like, you should make really good tables, and I just think there's something profound about that of like, gosh, if you do all things unto the Lord, then you should be making the best table there is, like you should really take pride in your work because you're doing it unto the Lord, and the rest of the world will see that. And that will be provocative because there's something about bringing out truth, beauty, goodness around us. And that's kingdom work, and work matters, period. And we get to do that in other ways too, right? So anyway.
Love it. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. And for those watching, I'll include the links for his book on Amazon, and also I'll find that essay and we'll link that down there too. Well, thanks again, Jeff, for this time. I'll sign us off here, and then I'll end the recording, but go check out Qualified by Jeff Eads. Thanks for your work there at Ball State and preparing that next generation to go out throughout the world, and also loving on the saints at the Revolution too. Appreciate it a ton.
Great. Thanks, Mike.